Thank you, Nomi. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on community eligibility, tips and best practices for making it work at lower ISPs. As Nomi said, my name is Allison Perez, and I am a Child Nutrition Policy Analyst with the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's conversation. We know how busy everyone is, and we really appreciate your interest and your participation. We wanted to host this webinar today because community eligibility season is upon us, and we want to make sure that eligible schools and districts across the country have all the tools they need to figure out how to make it work regardless of their ISP level. As many of you know, this year has highlighted the value of offering school meals at no charge to all students. Community eligibility provides an excellent opportunity for high poverty schools and districts to continue to offer free breakfast and lunch to all students, even beyond the pandemic and the 2021-2022 school year. The goal of this webinar is to provide strategies and resources for successfully implementing community eligibility at lower percentages of identified students, to hear from a speaker about their best practices, and to answer any questions you may have about making community eligibility work for your school or district. Next slide. We have a full agenda today, so now I just want to go over the schedule quickly for our webinar. First, I am going to give a brief overview of community eligibility provision and some tips and strategies from FRAC to make it work at lower ISPs. Next, I am very excited to hear from our speaker, Robert Shaheen, who is the Director of Food and Nutrition Services of the New Bedford Public Schools in Massachusetts. After that, I'll briefly go over some of FRAC's resources on community eligibility, and then we'll be saving our question and answer session for the end. However, please feel free to use the Q&A function on your screen to submit any questions you have at any point during the conversation, and we'll get to them at the end. Next slide. The community eligibility provision, or also known as CEP, allows high poverty schools and districts to provide free breakfast and lunch to all students without having to collect meal applications. Schools are reimbursed using a formula that is based on the proportion of low-income children in the school or district, using a figure called the Identified Student Percentage, or ISP. Any school or district can use this option if at least one of its schools has 40% or more of its students certified for free meals without an application. The term identified students includes those students who are in one of these two categories. Children who are directly certified through data matching because their households participate in SNAP, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, or FDIPR, and in some states, Medicaid. Children who are certified for 3 meals without an application also, because they are participating, or rather experiencing homelessness, they are migrant, they are enrolled in Head Start, or in foster care. This ISP is then multiplied by 1.6 to get the percentage of meals that are reimbursed by the federal government at the free rate. So schools with an ISP of 62.5 or higher receive the free federal reimbursement for 100% of meals served. In the past few weeks, USDA extended the summer waivers that have been so crucial to school meal service during the pandemic through the end of the 2021-2022 school year. We are very happy about this, and we also want to make sure that schools and districts recognize the opportunity that community eligibility provides as an option to continue to serve these students free meals on a 4-year cycle beyond the pandemic. We want to make sure that they take advantage of these higher ISPs observed during the pandemic because of increased need, and make sure that they lock in these higher ISPs for 4 years so that it can help schools and districts serve as many free meals as possible to students once school nutrition operations do return to normal eventually. Next slide. We've also often heard from our partners, especially several years ago when community eligibility was first implemented, that it's difficult for schools with ISPs lower than 62.5 to participate. As we have seen in our research through the years, however, thousands of schools across the country are comfortably operating CEP with ISPs below 62.5, and those numbers continue to grow. During the 2019-2020 school year, in fact, nearly 40% of schools operating community eligibility had ISPs below 60, with 28% of schools with ISPs between 50% and 60%, and 10% of schools participating with ISPs between 40% and 50%. Key to making this work is making sure that your ISP is as accurate and up-to-date as possible when states collect this data in the spring, and then when making the election into the program over the summer, so that you can maximize your reimbursement level. Also key is regularly conducting financial analyses of your school nutrition operations to make your finances work for your district. To help with this, FRAC has put together a series of financial calculators and an ISP optimizing grouping tool to help schools and districts figure out the best way to make community eligibility work for their situation, which you can find at fraccep.org. Next slide. In addition to the strategies on the previous slide, FRAC has compiled a series of best practices over the years that have helped districts make CEP work at lower ISPs, which include the following: implementing breakfast in the classroom or other alternative school breakfast models to increase our participation, offering meals after school to maximize federal reimbursements, tracking daily participation, engaging students to determine their preferences and to get them excited to participate, providing appealing, high-quality meals, and promoting your program to students, parents, and the community at large through communications and outreach. Next slide. We know that it's often helpful to hear from someone who has been operating community eligibility on the ground to see how they are making it work, which is why I'm really excited to kick things off to our fabulous speaker for today, Rob Shaheen, who, as I said earlier, is the Director of Food and Nutrition Services at the New Bedford Public School District in Massachusetts. Go ahead and take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Allison. It's great to be working with you here, and I've had a relationship with FRAC for more than 4 years, and there's really a lot of wonderful resources that they have available for CEP for your district. So next slide, please. So I started in Wareham, Massachusetts, a district that was about 2,400 students, and when I got there, they had just started CEP the year before, and the numbers were they were using the sheets and so forth to get direct certification to figure out what their ISP was going to be. So I could talk a little about how that experience was and then what I'm doing now. So next slide, please. So first of all, what you need to do is you have to make sure that your student list is accurate and up to date. You can get that usually from the school attendance person that takes care of the enrollment. There's usually a template that you can use. It's an Excel type of CSV file that will list all the students and so forth in there. And you use that list to send up to whatever portal that you use to figure out who's directly certified and who's not. So next slide, please. So here's an example of kind of what it should look like. Like I said, it's usually a template. You'll have the row number, first name, last name, date of birth. This is kind of what will come back to you when you send up that first few pieces of information. They usually need a first name, last name, date of birth. If you have a student identification number, that helps, depending on what your state uses. And then you'll get this list back, and it'll show you what's exactly matched, what's an exact match that would be a student that would qualify towards your ISP amount. So you want to make sure you keep this list updated, save it, keep it in a safe spot so that other people can't access it. Obviously, you want to make sure because it's student information on there. And then you'll use this list to determine what your ISP is. So next slide, please. So you want to do that process on a monthly basis if possible. You can do it every week if you have the time, but I think they require, at least here in Massachusetts, to do it 3 times a year. But I try to do it every month because what happens is people gain benefits every day. That changes. So as you capture folks who are directly certified, the students, you want to make sure that you keep that list separate, whoever's directly certified, from the people who haven't qualified. And those usually come out as no matches on the list. Because if you load that list back up again and someone had got off the benefit, then you would have them off your list, and then that would count against you. So once someone qualifies for benefits and they're directly certified, they're good for the whole year. You don't have to worry about them at all. So you want to keep that separate from the folks who are not matches or haven't been directly certified. Like I said, it helps to increase your percentage. I'm not sure. I think they've updated a lot of the systems. So the household member thing, they've kind of figured that out in Massachusetts where, if I'm the brother of someone else who's there and you show up a few times on the list, it makes it confusing. But if you have an IT person that manages for you that house, but you just have to make sure that you're dealing with exact match, no match. Don't worry about the household member stuff. Partial match, I know that they've gone and updated that part, so it's based on a percentage of students that are partial match, and so they give you credit for some students, so there's not much you have to do about that. But if you do get a partial match or someone you can't find the information for, it's most likely that they're like a migrant or homeless a type of student, and you can check with the guidance counselors at the schools to see if you can figure out if those students are in that criteria. And then you have the documentation to back that up, and they will then count as an exact match. And then depending on, I know the last couple of years has been kind of strange, and the date to complete that last upload is usually sometime at the end of March or beginning of April. I think they've extended those in some states for the program, but you just want to make sure you check with your state's Department of Education as to what that is. So will you get that last upload in before the due date, just to make sure you capture all the students. Next slide, please. So here's how I was able to figure out what my identified student percentage was in Wareham. Like I said, we had about 2,400 students enrolled. The first time we get into the program, it was about 47%. So that equates to about 75% of the reimbursement. And I was a little nervous. It was my first year there in 2016, 17. And so I'm like, geez, well, I may be able to make it work where I'm not going to get the 100%. So the superintendent was really adamant about, listen, we're going to do it. We're feeding the kids. We'll make it work. So it took a lot, to do it in terms of, you have to manage other things. And I'll talk about that when we get into the next slides. But because the next year I went back and, did those uploads, I increased it to 53%, which is about 85% of the reimbursement. Now that's a pretty good difference in amount. And now that carries over for 4 years. So if I go try to do the number again the next year and it comes at 52, I don't have to take that number. I can stay at 53 for the 4 years and keep it that way. If it goes higher, then you can add a year, and I'll explain that when we get a little bit into later on in the presentation. So in New Bedford, it's a whole new ball game in here. There's a lot more poverty, 14,000 students, and you can see 63%. I'm already over the 62.5%, so I'm getting 100% of the reimbursement. And then just the past year, doing the number again, because of so many people, unfortunately, lost their jobs or out of work, it went up to 67%. Now you don't gain any extra, reimbursement for that. You cap out at 62.5, but it keeps your percentage higher, and you get to add, like I said, another year on at the end of the 4 years because you're way up there. So I changed it. I said, okay, I want to do 4 years from now, and I want to be at 67%. So and that's what I said. It's like you get to refinance every year when you do the number, because if you get a better percentage or the same percentage, you want to keep adding years on to that 4-year program. Next slide, please. So here's something that you want to look at in your program to determine, when you're doing CEP. Breakfast participation is a huge way to bring in revenue in your program. And I found it really easy in terms of the items that you have to have, the costs and so forth, and staffing. I mean, it didn't take a lot more staff to go from a participation of, let's see, it was like in the low 60s at some of the schools, and it went up to almost 80%, so it didn't require any more staff to do that work. And what I found, it was just more items. They just had to pack more items in the bag. So and that made a huge difference in terms of the amount of revenue you're going to bring in. Now there's opportunities obviously here at the high school and the middle school. It dipped a little bit, but that had to do with, I think, basically not having a good menu and a variety of items. So we looked at that, just before I left, and we were going to make some improvements to that, so we can try to get that participation up, because everybody's free. Everyone can get a free meal. So, why wouldn't we be at 80% or higher? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. The high school had a problem where the kids were coming in, they didn't have time to get breakfast. So we were trying to institute a second chance breakfast, because it's 7 o'clock. You're 16, 17-year-old, you're dragging in basically to your class. You don't have time to think about eating. So we were looking at some alternative ways of getting breakfast to those students. Next slide, please. So in New Bedford, it's the same type of thing. Like we had great participation at some of the elementary schools, but at the middle school, the first one there, only 123 students participate, and there was like 904 students that didn't participate. That's a scary number. And we have to go back and figure out what's wrong with the program in terms of getting access to that. Same thing at the high school. I mean, the opportunity there with those to get more meals to those students is tremendous. I mean, it just makes a difference in your program in terms of revenue streams that you can get in. So that's what you need to do. You need to break it out and see where the areas in your school district that you can try to increase participation to get that numbers up. Next slide, please. So, this is just kind of how you can figure out the money wise, whether you're going to make money on this or not. If you're in that 40 to 50% ISP, where it's kind of scary, right? Because you're not getting the whole 100% of the reimbursement. So there is some states, there's probably FRAC. I know they have like a CEP calculator you can use. It's a great tool, but don't go by 100%. I mean, there's other factors that go into that. If your participation goes up, that would change the numbers in the calculator. So don't get too scared about that. Well, I'm only at 40% participation at my school, and it says I'm only going to make $150 by doing this. Well, that's probably not the case. It's probably going to go up, 20 or 30% if you market it right in terms of the breakfast. So you want to make sure you have profit and loss statement. You got to know where your numbers are on a month. I look at it every week, but at least on a monthly basis, you got to reconcile, where you are, what are you spending money, and what money's coming in. Calculate your food costs and plate costs. How much is it costing you per meal? What's your meals per labor hour? Use those tools, because that'll tell you whether you have too much labor, too less labor. You have your items that are too expensive. So it might be a little bit of you can take some money from one area. If you have low labor costs, then you might be able to increase in the menu and buy some more products. Are you offer versus serve? If they have to take all the items, that's not great, because at least if you had offer versus serve, they can decline some items and you won't have to buy as much. You can save a little bit there. If you can join a collaborative in terms of buying when you do your bids, that helps for better pricing. Entitlement money. If you get entitlement dollars for commodities, you have to use every penny. It's like you're leaving money on the table, if you're not using all that, because that's stuff you don't have to, buy. You're paying maybe the delivery charge, but it's a small percentage of what it is you can use for the food in your menu, which brings down your plate cost. Commodity ordering, duty, fresh, those type of things. All great programs. I use them 100%. Next slide, please. So here's just a snapshot in Wareham of how I can show you we made money. So the first year I was there, well, actually 14, 15, I was there in 15, 16. It was a small profit of about $28,000. And then when I got there, we started to utilize the commodities better, and try to make sure that the menu was clean. So we made a little bit more money. And then when I made a little bit more money, I started to invest back into the program, buying equipment. So you can see there, I took a loss of $55,000, but I spent $109,000 on upgrading equipment. And then the same thing the next year. I really took off in 17, 18. It takes you, like, I think, personally, about 2 or 3 years to get your program running as to how you would like it to run, with working with the staff and the managers, using the commodities, get them to look at food costs, all those things. So, I made a huge amount in 17, 18, almost $200,000. And I left there after that with on the books of almost $300,000 that they had as an ending balance. So, it worked for me. And those are all the things that I used to make it successful. So, if the If the faculty and the administration is behind you, it makes it a lot easier. You just have to try to work through what the issues are at your school. I had battles with teachers on breakfast in the classroom. It was tough. They grieved, the whole process. But I ended up finding teachers that really wanted it to happen, and I used a pilot program for them to do it. And then after they did it, they talked with the other teachers about it, and that was the buy-in. So next slide, please. So yeah, so that's basically, wrapped up how, the things that I use, and just talking to other districts that do CEP. There's a district in Fall River that started, which is about a little smaller than my size. There's one in Randolph, Massachusetts, that's probably about 4,000 students. They just started CEP the year before last, and they had no student debt. They went from, I think Fall River had about $60,000 a year in student debt. He went to zero the next year when he started CEP, and he was, I think they were in the 50s in terms of their number, the ISP number. Same thing in Randolph. So, I think this is a perfect opportunity to do it and just see what you're going to get. I know you're going to get, a pretty good reimbursement rate doing SSO if that's what you choose for the next year, but it'll give you a great sort of window into what it could be if all the students eat for free. Get a breakfast, lunch, or dinner and other programs. So, that's pretty much it in a nutshell from where I stand. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rob. So before we go into questions, I just briefly wanted to go over some details on what community eligibility will look like for next school year. As many of you may already be aware, USDA recently extended some key waiver flexibilities for community eligibility for the 2021-2022 school year, giving states, districts, and schools more time and flexibility to elect into CEP for the school year. We've included some key dates for this year on this slide, including the extended deadline for states to notify schools and districts of their eligibility, which is on June 30th, and the extended deadline for schools and districts to elect into participating in community eligibility, which is September 30th. I also want to just flag very quickly that we've already heard from some states that they may not be using this waiver authority, so please make sure to contact your state agency to clarify what the timeline is that they're using for this year. Next slide. And then I also did want to flag the wide variety of community eligibility resources available on FRAC's website, including our CEP webpage, some one-pagers we have available, such as taking a fresh look at community eligibility for the 2021-2022 school year, a one-pager on making it work with lower ISPs. We also have our community eligibility database that has a list of schools participating in community and eligibility for the 2020-2021 school year. We also have our grouping tools and our financial calculators that I alluded to earlier and that Rob talked a little bit about. I do want to flag that the financial calculators, we have 3 different financial calculators. We have sort of like a broad, high-level break-even calculator that allows schools to input their data, their broad level data, and then gives you sort of like a table where you're able to see if your participation is at this level, then you're going to be making this amount of money given your financial situation. And it allows you to see how much participation you need to see in order to break even with CEP for your district. We also have a district level calculator that allows districts to plug in the schools in their districts to see how it works at the district level. And then we have a school level calculator, which is a lot more granular, which allows schools to input the specifics about their schools and the different types of schools within a different district and the different groupings and things like that. So those are there. And then we also, of course, have our grouping tool, which allows schools and districts to put together different potential groupings of schools to maximize ISP and therefore the reimbursement. At the next slide. At this time, we just want to open it up to the audience for questions. Please feel free to insert your questions in the Q&A function. And to get us started, I have a question for Rob, which you may have touched on, but What do you see as the biggest benefit to implementing community eligibility in your school districts over the years?
Oh, without a doubt, I just feel that, you're providing food to more students, access to food. And it takes away all of the overt identifying, no one has to worry about, there's no student debt. So there's a bunch of things, but I would say that access to food is probably the main thing for the students, I feel is the biggest benefit.
Absolutely. And then we have from one of our audience members on the other side of the coin, it seems like people are on board. What's the biggest barrier to CEP, do you think?
The biggest barrier is fear. It's fear about whether you can break even or make money. That's what people when I talk to them about it, they're just, they want to do it. It sounds like a great thing, but will I go in debt? Or will I have will the cost not outweigh what I'm going to be taking in? And that's the biggest fear. That's why I think it's good to go, by using the calculators. I think what Allison had said about if you have a few schools and you want to just pilot one school to start it and test it, you could break it out that way. I've heard of districts that's done that before. So that's one way to look at it too.
Excellent. And then we also got a question about if you could go into greater detail in the commodity program and how that factors into the CEP and into your broader nutrition programs.
Absolutely. So every year, I'm pretty sure most districts get that commodity entitlement dollars to use for the brown box or DoD fresh. And so, in Wareham, I think I had about $70,000 to spend throughout the year. And it was great because I could buy a lot of the fruit, a lot of the vegetables, and that brings the cost down. So if you're figuring out your plate costs and the chicken patties 35 cents and the rolls 11 cents, well, that's it. The fruit and the vegetable, there's no cost to it. And that brings your plate cost down. The milk is like, 25 cents too. But I just find that that's money that you just have to utilize. It's free. It's like having a credit card, that you can spend. And you can also use it for for if you want a certain chicken patty from Tyson or whatever on your bid. Sometimes you can get net off invoicing where they'll give you a discount, for using that product. So that you can use your commodity dollars towards that too. It's just a huge benefit. The DoD Fresh program is fresh fruit and vegetables that you can get. It starts, I think, in September and goes through May. You can split some money towards that. They keep increasing that every year, so that's good to use. It's just a huge benefit. Definitely find out from your state how you would qualify depending on your district size and so forth.
Absolutely awesome. So we have a question from someone who is not working in food service. Is there a way to figure out what the ISP is? They were having trouble finding it. So unfortunately, schools are the ones that are conducting direct certification throughout the year. And so, that is definitely school level data that they report to their state agencies. And then once a year, the state agencies are required to notify the schools based off of the direct certification data what their ISP is. And the deadline for that for this coming school year is June 30th. So I think if you're looking to figure out what your ISP, what your school's ISP is, definitely be on the lookout from that notification from the state agency. I think that is something that is posted on state agency websites under the food nutrition. And also on school, check with your your local school district, check with your school as well, because that is a number that is required to be published by the law at least once a year. And then if a school decides to operate CEP, then they actually have to report to USDA and their state agency what ISP they're choosing to use, either if they're working in a group of schools where the group will have the same ISP for every school, or if they're operating as an individual school. So definitely just be on the lookout, check out your state agency website, and they should have information, if not for the current school year, then for the last school year, with identified students, of which is the number of students that are directly certified through those programs, and the number of students enrolled, so that you can take those numbers and then calculate that ISP. So I have a question about tracking meals and tracking second meals. Do you have any insight on that?
So yeah, I mean, I would definitely contact your state representative, your Department of Education. But yeah, we have a POS system or a ticket system. So the first meal is obviously is no charge, but if they get a second meal, then you would have to charge them for it. There's no second meals. The other stigma that happens or misnomer I find is that if a student brings a lunch to school, they think they can get a free milk because the program's, because it's a free meal. That's not how it works either. You have to get a complete meal. It's not like everything's free. Nothing's free, right? So it's hard. You have to explain that to the staff. You have to explain that to the faculty administration so they understand how the program works. And that's the parameters of the program. We don't make those rules. That's just how it works. The program is for breakfast, for lunch, for snack, but you have to get the complete meal and you can only get it once. So we use, like I said, we use tickets or we use or a POS system to track that so students can't get a second meal. Otherwise, they'd have to buy it.
We have a question on your POS system, which is, do you require IDs with your POS?
So you can do it a bunch of different ways. You can use a PIN pad. I know with COVID the last year or so, we were trying to get the scanning on ID cards, for touchless. So yeah, it depends. It seems like the kids who are kindergarten, first and second grade benefit from having something they can scan, and so they have time to learn their number. And as the kids get older, they remember their number, then they can use the keypad. So I use either or. Some of the feeder schools that I have that don't have a great system. There's one person, one man band who's doing the meal serving. The ticket thing or the poker chip is what we use now to grab that at the beginning of the line, then drop it in a bucket, and then they can count the meals that way. So for CEP, there are, it's not as, you still have to count the meals, but you have to work with your Department of Education on what they're comfortable with in terms of the meal counts for breakfast, for lunch. Breakfast in the classroom has been a challenge, when you're first starting it out. But once you get a system in place with the faculty or the teachers on that, they have to record that the student took a meal. It's a little challenging, but it takes a little while for them to get used to how it is. And there's not, there's no room for doing something out of the norm, whatever your Department of Education is comfortable with how you want to do it.
Perfect, thank you. And then we have a question about what is your feeling in connection with the PEBT cards for students versus what school nutrition programs are doing?
Well, that's a great question because, yeah, I've been getting inundated with calls from parents, and I basically have nothing to do with PEBT cards. So, you don't want to get wrapped up in that. I think what you do is you need to find out in your district who the student liaison is or student services. They would be able to better hunt down what the issues parents might be having with the card and money on it. Sometimes it has to do with the information that's put in the school system, whether they were cohort D or they were remote or they weren't remote. That's nothing you want to get involved in. I just try to forward them to another department. When they get directly certified, the list goes up. The state takes that information and figures out, who's going to get what. But as long as the student information in that file is correct, there shouldn't be a problem. But I don't deal with that. I send that off to another department.
Absolutely. And just to briefly touch on PEBT, PEBT is a benefit that's provided to students who had been receiving free or reduced price meals prior to the pandemic and as a result of school closures. And so this is a benefit and an opportunity that is offered to students at all students at CEP schools. So this is, from FRAC's perspective, we are very supportive and happy about the way that school nutrition programs have been operating over the course of the pandemic to get as many meals out at free of charge to as many students across the country. And we're also very supportive of PEBT as a program to help families purchase food for themselves and for their children to alleviate hunger. And so this is a program that we're very much in support of in conjunction with the way the summer meal waivers have been implemented.
Yeah, and don't throw away the cards. Keep the card because they keep adding more benefits. This summer they said they're going to add more benefits through August, I think. So, make sure if you do talk to anyone, make sure they don't throw away their PEBT card.
Absolutely, keep those cards. Keep those cards
forever.
All right, so do we have it? I'm looking and we're running out of questions. If you have a question, please go ahead and put it into the Q&A box. And I'll give people a minute to submit some more questions if they want.
Yeah, Allison, you can also, if you want to list my email address for folks and they can contact me, you know, or through you, I'm happy to answer any questions down the road too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can please feel free to contact me. My email address is just aperez@frac.org. And then after the webinar, we're also going to be sending a follow-up email with Rob's information and FRAC some more FRAC information. So if you can't think of a question now and you have a question later, please feel free to reach out to us. And I'm not seeing any more questions, so I guess I can close up the webinar. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and a special thank you to Rob for sharing his expertise. The recording, as I said, and the resources mentioned will be shared in a follow-up email. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. Again, my email is aperez@frac.org. And thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.